Namaste, and welcome to another session of insightful conversations at AuroBharati. AuroBharati, as you know, is a vertical of Sri Aurobindo Society looking at studies and research in various domains of Indian culture and how especially focusing on how the eternal spirit of India is being expressed and is given new forms for today and tomorrow in the light of the vision of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother for future of India and future of humanity. And in that context, we have a very interesting session planned for today on a topic that is about bringing wisdom and insights from the Indian approach to psychology in classrooms. And we'll be looking at an educator's experience and insights into that with someone who has actually worked in the field of bringing these insights of Indian and integral yoga psychology and psychology of self into the educational settings. So as our regular viewers know, that these conversations become part of our monthly journal called Renaissance, which is again looking at giving new forms to the ancient, the eternal spirit of India. So let me briefly introduce our guest for today, Dr. Aditi Kaul. She has a PhD in psychology, and she calls herself a psychology enthusiast who lives by I guess your life motto is conscious living is a full-time job, and that is something we can all agree with. And after completing your doctorate, you had an opportunity to take a 2-semester-long course in Indian integral psychology here at Pondicherry, and that sort of gave Aditi a new direction in her life and approach to psychology. So since then, she's been working on developing approaches as to how to bring life-affirming spirituality and insights from the Indian wisdom into psychology contexts in educational settings. So we'll know a little bit more about your background as we go through the conversation. So shall we begin, Aditi?
Absolutely, yes.
Welcome to Sri Aurobindo Society.
Thank you.
So I first want to know that you have a very interesting background, you bring in commerce, economics, and then organizational behavior psychology in your master's, I think in your doctorate work as well. And from there to coming into the more yogic based or integral approaches to psychology, what has this shift meant for you in terms of as an individual evolving and growing, and then also as an academic and professional in the field of psychology education? So share with us some experience on that.
Yeah, I mean, now when I look back, it really looks like a really distant past that, oh yeah, I was also studying commerce at one point of time. It often comes in the introduction. But as far as I remember, it was always for me to know. And this whole idea of human beings, who they are, where they come from, just a sense of exploratory nature, so to speak. And I didn't know so much, now I can articulate it in a better manner because of the experience. But at that point, it was just like there is something missing. But what is that? I didn't know. So I had a very basic education like everybody does. And when I was studying commerce, I had an opportunity to intern at corporate offices. And when I started going there, I saw people, then I wondered why they're behaving, how they're behaving. So that intrigued me. And I thought maybe psychology, as everybody knows, is a science of behavior. You can decode people, so to speak. So I thought maybe this can answer my quest. So I shifted from commerce to psychology. But when I came to psychology, I didn't feel that my quest was answered. I thought maybe. And I thought, okay, I'll do my master's, that will answer. It didn't answer. Then I thought maybe I'll do my PhD, it will answer. It didn't answer. So I just kept on moving in the hope of that something will come my way. And as often I say, my actual learning began when my formal education ended. It's only when I completed my PhD, I came to Pondicherry and I found out about Indian psychology and I came to Aurobindo. And for me, Aurobindo, integral psychology gave the language to my experience, which I was holding for all these years. So for me, coming to Indian psychology or coming to Pondicherry was homecoming. And since then, I've been working in this field. So that's been pretty much that quest which led me to Pondi.
I think many people can relate to that, especially if you have a little bit of seeking inside you, this idea of actually finding out what really we want to know after the end of formal education, because it's so structured and so boxed in. So yes, I mean certainly I can relate to that, but to me that maybe that realization came much later. So you're fortunate that it came right soon after finishing your doctorate. So when having studied in Pondicherry at Indian Psychology Institute and you've continued to explore integral yoga psychology and integral yoga as of Sri Aurobindo, both not just as an academic interest, but also as a way to kind of, live your life. So how would you, now that you are also teaching, how do you distinguish between Indian psychology or integral psychology? What is there a difference between the two in the way you understand, or are these two terms somewhat synonymous? So just so for our readers and viewers, if you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think this Indian integral psychology debate has been quite some time it's been held. I mean, I remember reading about the Pondicherry 2002 manifesto that they were wanting to bring in Indian psychology into academics and getting the inner self approach to psychology. But in a very nutshell, I can also share how I have experienced it or understood it. When you say Indian psychology, it gives you a sense of a broader perspective, a sense where all the things which have been in the ancient scriptures developed by different seers and sages, all of those things, it's much broader space about the know-how, the technical aspect of the inner aspect of human beings. So it's mostly how I understand is the what of the inner realms of being. So, and there you have all the Buddhist psychology, the Vedic psychology. It's a very vast field. And when you look at integral psychology, of course, it lies its root in Indian psychology because it's essentially talking about the knowledge of the self. But how I see is that Indian psychology is more of the what, and the integral psychology is more of the how of it. Integral psychology, as we all know, is based on Aurobindo's work. It comes from integral yoga. It gives you a potential of transformation. It's packed with so many of tools and techniques that helps you to address the how of work. For example, the Vedic scriptures, everything speaks about that you have to go within, you have to go within, you have to have a witness attitude. So there's a method laid down in the scriptures. How to bring it to your life is what I see the role of integral psychology. And that is why being very true to the philosophy, it holds that potential of transformation because it's essentially the bridge building. And that is what I see it and I experience it and I bring it to my life as well as to my classes, that how do you bridge the build the bridge between the inner and the outer. So that's how they are together, yet they have their different functions. So at least that's in my experience so far true.
Can you, I'm trying to get a little bit more specific here. Can you point to some key insights from your studies on integral yoga psychology, or Indian scriptures, kind of trying to cull the insights from Indian scriptures on this sort of study of the self, as to what, if there are some specific insights or tools that you just mentioned that have been most transformative for you in your own journey? Because I think this is one thing that so often gets missed out in our understanding of education, that it's the teacher, the consciousness or the state in which she approaches the classroom and her life, her work. So what are some of the key insights that have been mostly deeply transformative for you? And then we'll go into the how you bring that into the classroom. So
yeah, like as I hear you speak, the first thing that comes to me is self-observation. That's the fundamental basis of any individual to work on. That how can, and that's why you introduced me saying, no, conscious living is a full-time job. And it's just rooted in self-observation, that how am I doing what I'm doing? How am I thinking? And essentially, I often use the word bridge mostly almost in my conversations because It is really bridging that intention action, that we are so focused on the action, the outcome, that we often forget the origin of my action. So the more and more I become conscious of the origin of my action, I expand within that, okay, this is the intention. So the moment I start focusing on the intention, I can make a conscious choice that this intention needs manifestation or not. I can let it go. So creating that space more and more between how I receive that impulse and how I act on that impulse. And in between, all my sadhana, all my work comes in. And more as the space increases, the more and more we become silent, we become calm, that aspect of surrender, all that we study comes into practical application when I start creating that gap between my intention and action. So that's the root of how I practice. And then, of course, you have your own connection with the space within, and all of those things come across. Like I personally have developed a lot of symbolic understanding of things. I work through images, I work through numbers. It's just my own method to just make sense of the world, but not get attached to the world. And when maybe we discuss the classroom activities, I can bring to you that what all I use in class. Basically, what I use in my life, I bring to class. So it's just all one.
I think this last thing that you just sort of mentioned casually is the key. It's all one. The connection between your own sadhana, your own inner work as a person, as an individual, and how you again like bridge that world, inner world of you to the world, outer world of work. So yes, can you share a little bit about how you go about bringing some of what you just said in formal educational context? And I should mention it that Dr. Aditi Kaul teaches at Auro University in Surat, courses in integral psychology and both Sri Aurobindo studies. And also, I guess you also design and conduct other online courses in dialogue-based inquiry. We'll come to that in a little bit. So in a more formal educational setting where students are primarily enrolled for like a more mainstream bachelor's or master's program, and yet this is an institution that is inspired by and somewhat rooted in the larger philosophy and teaching of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. So how do you go about bringing this, what you call as first person exploration or self-observation as the basis for psychology, studying psychology in this context? And, besides your own presence as a teacher and your own inner work, what kind of maybe curriculum materials and learning tools that you bring for the students? So if you can share some experiences from there, that will be really wonderful.
Sure. Yeah, I think one very important keyword here is the idea of instrument. And it was interesting enough. Today, the first thing I saw in the morning was the calendar. Today's quote in the calendar is about being the divine instrument. And I was just wondering in the morning, it's such a good time to speak about this. So in psychology classes, it's very easy to bring this method because as young students, what they understand, and they come very hopeful in the psychology class, no, we want to change the world, we want to understand people, we want to help people. So these kind of thoughts they have when they come to a psychology class. So just to pick up from there and just ask them that, what is the method you will use to help people? And the basic idea is you are the instrument of help. You yourself are offering to the world for the help. So how do you refine the instrument of help? So Indian psychology, the integral perspective is all about refining the instrument of help. You understand the composition of the instrument, figure out what is it made of, how do you use it, bring attention to the details of it, and then carve your own path. So in the very first class, I give them the idea that you are the instrument of help for the world. Let's refine this instrument. Let's become aware of this instrument. Let's get to know it, and know it not by the standards set by the world, but tuning to your own rhythm of life. What is your rhythm of life? So such very basic questions, which they know somewhere, but they have not thought about it. So bringing attention to those very basic questions. And then very essential is to hold space. And it's only in holding that space where my sense of self-work comes in. And I always choose presence over preparation. Like how often mother has said, no, that you prepare, you keep the preparation. It's because sometimes what happens is you go to the class, maybe I'm not that connected. Then I will make use of the preparation I've made. But my prime focus is how present I'm there. And so every time there's a lot of silence within, which keeps that space for the students to explore. And in that moment, there's also another thing which is coming to me right now. It's more of choosing consciousness over conditioning at every single moment when I'm interacting with them. Because as a person, I have gone through that formal education. So I have that conditioning of how a class should be, how a teacher should be. Am I doing the right job? Am I even focusing on what the student needs? So I have all those questions in my mind. So not letting those questions hinder what I'm creating in the class. So that requires a lot of work, because you like it or not, I have that conditioning. I just have to become aware of it and not let interfere. So that is why it's always choosing every moment to become very conscious, not let the conditioning overpower, being present. So that is more about creating the atmosphere of that learning. And then there are a lot of tools, like primarily the material which I use is from the IPI website. If you have gone through the IPI website, it's an extensive space for all the material about Indian psychology, about Aurobindo's work, everything. And then there are a lot of online videos which are talking about self. So I introduce with very short videos accompanied by reflective questions. So you see something, then you reflect on it. You see something, you reflect on it. And a lot of class conversations, which now again it's a little tough because the last 2 semesters it's online. So it's not that effective for me. But in the present, when I'm offline in the class, it's really transformative, because all these young people are very smart. They just need a space where they can actually articulate what they're going through. That's all. So yeah, that is what primarily the method is. It's not so much about the material, it's more about what they are doing with the material. So that's how I see it.
And what kind of responses have you gotten from the students in terms of their openness and receptivity to this? I mean, there are many things, first of all, for them also, it's a deconditioning kind of an opportunity that you are providing, because they have been till now, exposed to a certain kind of teaching learning context. So there is that, then there is the actual topic that you are introducing to them, and also the approaches, asking them to reflect, asking them to sort of, in a sense, make themselves vulnerable also. So what kind of responses have you received?
Yeah, I mean, just this question always brings a smile on my face, because I suddenly remember those instances when students really sometimes they wonder that what are you talking about? Because it's so new to them and they're like, why? Like, why is the need? I really want to figure out the other person. I am fine. That kind of response. And also because it is an academic setting, they have that it's a module. We will have assignments. We want to get marks. So as you rightly said, it's all about conditioning. So, and that's why I said it's a lot of self-work, because I have to take their resistance and I don't have to take their rejection personally, because I understand that. So even if a student is saying that I'm not interested or I don't want to know, just give them that space. Because one thing which I've learned in Indian psychology is it's nothing to impose. It's an experiential approach. So even if somebody's method is through rejection, I have to accept it. If everybody's saying, yeah, I've understood, that means there's a problem, because I'm directly hitting on what they truly believe in. So I have to be very silent in that sense of not bringing, oh, I'm a teacher, you should believe in what I say. I simply ask them to question their own beliefs. So it starts simply from that art of questioning and not that urgency of an answer. I keep telling them that learn the art of refining your question. Not in a hurry that, oh, we're in a class, I have to have an answer. So because they have basically cutting through the chase of validation, because students are all looking for validation. They are at that age, they want to be perfect. They want to appear that, oh, I know it all. So just cutting that chase of validation and making that space for questioning. And they have all the right to question me. They have all the right to reject what I'm saying. But I often say that if you're rejecting what I'm saying, ask yourself what in you is rejecting. So then also that becomes a self-observation. It necessarily doesn't have to be a sense of, oh, yeah, you are saying something great. no, you're saying something I don't understand. But can you tell me why and what in you is not understanding? So basically, the language is there, the form is theirs. I just bring in the essence and pour it in their language so that it becomes much more admissible for them. So that is more or less the technique I use in the class.
Just listening to you, I was thinking of some experience from many years back. This was in my sort of more formal academic life in the United States when I used to teach a course called Self and Society. And even though it was sort of like within the realm of liberal studies, humanities, but the idea of the thrust of the course was on understanding oneself and the journey that one has been on. And the end product of that course was sort of an autobiographical reflective assignment. And a lot of times through the course of discussions, while we were reading others' autobiographies and somewhat sharing about that, a lot of time, several people opened up many deep things within them. And the idea was that there is a sense of confidentiality that, whatever they share just stays with me as a course facilitator, and it's not going to be, made public or printed out in any way, sort of way. But within the classroom also, there were often, some of them were very open, sharing things about, the pain that they've been carrying or baggage, all kinds of things from their growing up years or whatever, lots of problems, including maybe sometimes addiction that they've been dealing with in the past or things like that. So I'm just wondering, typically in an Indian classroom, when we have something like discussion-based inquiry, it is always about discussing some problem in the society, in the world outside. And here, somehow in this psychology context that you are creating, psychology of the self, the topic of discussion is ourself, one's own self or selves, as we know, many selves. So in that sense, how do you, is there enough openness you feel from the students, or is there something that, like what you said, they say there is no problem with me. But even if the point is not about problem, the point is about knowing self, So do you feel that sometimes it's like too out of the box for them, or how do they take it? What's kind of, again, like what kind of response you get from the students to talk about themselves?
Yeah. So students definitely open up. So what I do is I kind of make assignments in a way that first they go to an individual reflection inquiry. So they open up in writing. And once they see that what is on paper, what I have said, and then whatever they're comfortable with, they share in the class. So I make the first step as an individual inquiry, and then I follow it with a group assignment. So it doesn't make them too vulnerable also because they're in that age, they have that group image and all of those things happening. And then it often comes that they're much open in a one-to-one basis that after class, ma'am, I want to speak to you. Or just now we have chat emails and I'll write to you, this is my problem. So of course, there's a sense of oneness that comes in class because people are opening up, but they're more open in writing than in the class. That's my observation. And it's also a very slow and steady process because somebody says something, then they connect that, okay, yes, this is also what I'm going through. Usually at this age, they have parents issue, they have relationship issues. So you just give them that space and a possibility. So definitely, and that is why it's very important to keep in mind that once now when I'm talking, I remember one incident that suddenly we were having a group presentation back on campus, and one student became too vulnerable to even speak. And then I realized that you also have to be very mindful of how much to open, because then everybody just gets that, what do we do? So these are tricky things. There is a certain sense of balance which is required, that you don't open too much also, but at least you have begin to question. So there are experiences, but students are very open in that sense. I think because they have not developed that so much of restriction also. It's an age thing, I believe so.
Yeah, no, I think that's beautiful, because one of the things, as we know, in education in general, and particularly since we are talking about the Indian wisdom here, what is really true education without having this aim of knowing oneself? And I mean, you make it very concrete, or the courses that you do with the students make it very concrete for them that yes, education must help us to know ourselves. And I think this has some great implication on how our teacher education programs are designed. You have been fortunate to have this exposure to integral yoga and Indian psychology and things like that. But somebody who's teaching, let's say, chemistry or mathematics or whatever subject, history, there are ways to bring in that idea of knowing oneself through whatever is the content, through whatever is the subject matter. So you have worked a lot on something that you call as first person exploration. If you can share a little bit about that, and also how you think that can be somehow brought into a more mainstream understanding of our education. Because, like you mentioned about writing, students writing. I personally feel that writing for me gives me a very good way to practice what mother calls as stepping back. Because it is like, a little distance comes between me and what is going on inside me and my tendency to react to the impulse or that movement. So it becomes a very handy tool, very important tool. So in what is this first person exploration? How you go about practicing it, and how you think, in your view, can be brought into our educational offerings in general, particularly maybe teacher education, so that they have this tool when they are working with students.
Yes, absolutely. I think the entry point for it is like the key sentence, which is like basically my go-to sentence: objective view of your subjective self. How do you do that? So more and more you reflect on what is going on, and as you rightly said, write about it. And you can write it, you can just write words, you can even draw what is going on inside you, depending on what your interest is, what your inclination is. So how do you develop that systematic inquiry inside the realms of your thoughts, inside the realms of your emotions? And it's always consistency over intensity. I'm not saying that first day you are writing, you'll write everything about yourself. It's not possible, but write every day. Like in my class, the last 10 minutes are for reflective journal writing. And that too, for me, it's in two sections. One is what you have understood, what is your takeaway personally, and one is what was taught in the class. So you also have that construction, because we also have to develop in integral education senses and everything that you are taking in. Because if I completely make it subjective, they tend to wander and get more philosophical. So I also have to keep them grounded, because we're talking about concepts. If I'm teaching parts of the being, you need to know mental, vital, physical, because you're studying that. So like for me, one of the very essential part of my program is, after every class, what are the keywords you have taken from the class? So I take a round in the last 10-15 minutes. What are the keywords you took away, and write about it? And then maybe write 1 line or 2 line about it, because it's the words that register and then they can explode. And the more those words will come in their everyday vocabulary, the meaning will unfold for them. So one thing which I've realized in integral psychology, that there is no micromanagement. And there is no immediate need for, okay, today I spoke about vital, now tell me what is vital. Because that is our old education, that I gave you a definition, you give me back the definition. Doesn't work like that. So at times I have to really control myself because I also feel very motivated as like, oh, I want to know the result. Because I also have my parts of being jumping around, oh, I'm doing something like good, can you just tell me what it is? So I have to be really in check that, okay, if they're rejecting it or if they're taking their own time, to just give them that space. And be so aware that maybe if I'm saying in one way, their reflection is coming in another way. So do I have that capacity to hold that and not want them to reflect in a way which I want? Because then I'm just imposing it. So it's essentially giving them those keywords and seeing what they do with it. So like I'll give them 5 words and say, do you tell me how are these 5 words related? Or just pick up an incident and see if this word is fitting. So basically connecting the dots is one of the fundamental aspects in the class, so that they can relate the vocabulary used in the class to their everyday interaction. So that's very fundamental for our class.
Now, at Auro, you have a little bit more supportive context, or at least open context in which to do work like this. Do you think you can, or anybody who is interested in doing this, can bring it just as easily in a more other mainstream institution? Have you had interaction with some of your psychology colleagues or peers who have been doing something like this? Or do you feel there is some resistance at other institutions? There might be.
See, as far as resistance is concerned, definitely there's resistance to any change, not just alone education or psychology. People don't like change, no, and yet the only thing we aspire for is change. So there's kind of a paradox with human beings, which I'm still trying to decode. But yes, so there are, like when I was at IPI, we were doing workshops, there were teachers who were coming. So what I've observed is that if a teacher is personally inclined towards it, if it's a personal journey of self-exploration, even if the management is not so open about it, they bring it to their class. And it doesn't work the other way around. For example, if I am running an institute and if I'm in the management and I say you teach it, but if the teacher is not interested, it will not work as a curriculum. But even if the management is not open, but the teacher is like really open, they can find ways to bring it in the class. So this way it works, and it's a very slow and steady process. But and I know enough people, like I also have small circles which we often meet and discuss what is happening in the education sector. So there are people who are interested, who are wanting to apply these principles, who are wanting to bring in that change. But it's not at a mass level at the moment. But there are definitely enthusiastic people who are working for the transformation. That is there.
Good. That's very positive. That's very encouraging. And I think that's the way to make sustainable change. It will not be sort of imposed from top down through national level policy documents and things like that. I mean, that's okay. That serves a certain purpose to give a certain direction. But from the teacher herself or himself, if they want to bring those elements into their classroom, and that for that they have to be first exposed to and make it a part of their own work, both work as an academic and work as an individual, as a person, because as you said earlier, it's all one, inner or outer work, that way. So the word spirituality, how, when you are talking about, let's say, parts of the being or first person exploration with students, do you bring in like specific scriptural concepts from specific scriptures, and do you talk about them? And again, what kind of experience you have in bringing this word spirituality in a classroom setting?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to even start talking about it, because first for me it starts with my own reflection that now today I'm going to use words which they are like in a way already rejected. That doesn't work. That's not what is important in the academic setting. But again, what I bring in is a sense of wonderment. So I begin talking about things they know. For example, everybody knows religion. Everybody knows that we are in India, people worship gods. Everybody has a deity in their house, they worship, what they worship for. So I just bring in and make it very personal that have you ever wondered why do you worship? Or do you know what is behind the whole idea of symbolism? We have like, and we have some of the other festival going on. No? So I just take example of, see you now, this Chaturthi had come. Do you know why you worship? Do you understand the symbolism? What is the idea of God? What is the idea of creation? So I bring in creation stories. I bring in the concept of, because they understand tangible things. So though we speak about experience, like it's education is experiential, but most of what they understand is sensorial experience. It's only when they pass through the sensorial experience, they reach the inner realms. So it's basically how in integral education, we talk about near to the far approach. No. So I start building a sense of wonderment about what is happening around, which they know. And often at this stage, they have always resisted and revolted at home that, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want. So I'm like, okay, yeah, you have rejected it. It's like, yeah, we have rejected it. But why? But do you know? So just taking from the questions they've always had, but nobody answered it from them. That what is the symbolism behind these God forms which we see? And then when they have that entry point, then I tell them that, see, spirituality is this. It's more of action oriented. It is more of experience oriented. It's the out of form which we see. So you're rejecting the form without the experience. So can we build something where you can go beyond the form and see the experience? Then you choose the form of your own choice. So it immediately gives them a sense of freedom that, oh yeah, we have that possibility. So, and because and it's very funny, at least even I'm talking to, and I also use examples from their life. Like they use a lot of social media. They always have that image thing. So I tell them that, do you want to take that journey from image conscious to conscious living? Can you think of how it can be? So even for example, if they're posting something on, say, on Instagram as a filter, I often tell them, can you pause for a minute and see why are you using this filter and why not another filter? What in you is choosing it? What if you stop? So always taking the language which they understand and then making them very curious that what lies behind it. And once they have that sense of behind, then they can build on their own. Then, as I said, I don't have to micromanage and see that, oh, immediate results. So what I've also understood in these last 3 years of teaching, that there are no immediate results in Indian psychology. You are just showing them a way, a possibility, and then just hoping that they just follow it. So there is no immediate that I taught them one semester and their life is transformed. They're like, oh, this before, after. It doesn't work like that. Because then they have their, and I'm just teaching them 4 hours a week. They have a life beyond it. So just connecting the dots and leaving them open is how I bring these things together.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I mean, some of the examples that you just shared, they make a lot of sense. From image conscious to conscious living. I think that's a real key phrase that, again, in our society with this sort of like a huge young population and the impact of this image conscious, this idea, that's a very important thing. And I totally agree and resonate with what you just said about that we can only provide and, offer it to them, and then the rest is up to them. And life has its own ways to kind of, take them in that direction. If this becomes, as you said, like a full-time job or a full-time mode of living for them. So we can just leave it at that. So from this more formal educational context of Auro University to other work that you do on sort of dialogue-based inquiry with, I'm assuming it's more like doing courses with or sort of a reflection sessions with professionals or academics, other individuals in the field, not who are not necessarily exposed to psychology as a discipline, with People First or other organizations. So how did you get into that work, and what's different in terms of teaching in a more formal setting and sort of facilitating dialogue-based reflection process for mostly adults, professionals working in other domains of activity? So if you can just share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it also comes from my interest in the word psychology. Like every time I hear the word or I think about the word, for me, it's just a living experience and exploration. Psychology is life. I don't see it just as a subject to be taught in academics that, okay, this is what it is, just how we live on an everyday basis. So how in academics I bring to the awareness of students their processes. It's similarly when I talk to people who are not psychology students, but they are human beings wanting to figure out life. We all have that aspiration to progress. We just don't know what it is. And we're just looking in the, I would not say wrong direction, but not in the right direction. It's not wrong or right, but it's just that something is missing. So just bringing together the missing pieces together and showing them. So that's what I said, no, in this, like how mother used to say that all teachers need to be yogis. So what I take it is that how can you be as silent as possible so that you can just be there and people speak and it becomes sort of reflection. And when it is outside the academic spectrum, it's more about emotional problems. It's more about relationships, career issues, that they know this is not right, but they don't know what is the other thing to do. So just kind of creating that space to bring to their awareness their own psychological processes. Because one thing which I've understood about the Indian perspective is it's a process-based approach. And usually what academics or life in general teaches us is result-oriented approach. We are too occupied with what will be the outcome. That outcome obsession needs to be dropped and the attention needs to be brought into the process of what is happening. And the more focus we bring on the process, the natural outcome will be much more aligned to our journey. So just bringing their attention and awareness more and more to what is happening. And if you can manage say the making of an instrument, then what is the output is naturally up to your satisfaction or something what you need. So primarily, honestly, I don't do so much of work. It's just tiny threading of their own experiences and making it possibility for them that yes, this is possible. Because everybody wants to talk about it, but nobody speaks about it. Everybody, that's what we were talking about, image consciousness. Everybody, like look at today into social media, you see that everybody talks about being positive. You ask them how to do it, they will not know it. They only know how to forward positive messages. How to live those positive messages, it's not the case. And again, one thing which comes to me as I speak, a very important word is responsibility. What needs to be brought to everybody's attention, either it's academics or it is people in general, how to take responsibility of your own self. And it's a very deep topic. Maybe we can explore it in another question, or I just wanted to bring it here to see that more and more sense of responsibility of who you are and of your actions than of other people. And yeah, I would stop here, otherwise I'll just go too much into depth.
No, please go ahead, because I think this is really the crux of how we should understand the Indian approach to psychology. So please go ahead. The responsibility for self. It's you speak of psychology of self. That is the work that you do. So please share. Go on.
No, I was just building on that. For me, it's very important to bring to attention that how much do you take responsibility of your speech? How much do you take responsibility of your action? And very subtle points, like people, I just ask them to observe when they're interacting with, say, their friends, or if they're working, or their children, or their parent. Anything which goes wrong, it's either the environment or the other person. Like, it's very small example, like if students are running late for the class, while they reach the class, all they have thought is what was wrong, either with the on the way, maybe with the traffic, or maybe with the alarm, or maybe anything on the outside but their interest. So why are we not learning to speak what is actually there? Why are we are not being so transparent, and why are we not being so authentic? So I often say that in our interaction with the world, there are three things. There's you, there's the environment, and there's the other person. All the sense of responsibility of wrong is either the environment or the other person. And you're always in the mode of self-preservation, always. So you don't go beyond self-preservation and have that exploration. So you protect yourself, but before that, at least refine yourself, open yourself and see. So I just make sure that every conversation you are having, see how much you are taking that responsibility. And it can be as small as, say, keeping water in the fridge, or you didn't do it. As long as major life decisions of, say, choosing a career or choosing a life partner or anything like that. So how conscious you are of what you are putting out in the world. And in my experience, I've seen the moment people become conscious, the interaction is also less, because then you don't create unnecessary. When we are talking about consciousness, we're talking about energy, we understand how powerful it is. So how transparent I am becoming so that the energy can work through me, rather than me making it more like not living like this, but living like this. And it can only be through experience. It cannot be through theory or talking about things. So this is very fundamental for, as you were talking about first person exploration, no? Taking responsibility of your own psychological makeup, understanding your own psychological inquiry, that what is it, what is happening. And like one method I can just share, I make it very visual. So for me, it's the whole idea of inner family system. Like, how are my emotions, my family members? How is my mind? Like, we understand family, no? Like, Indians have this deep rooted sense of family system. And we know that who is the authority figure, who is the naughty child, who is the caring mother. So I ask them to label their parts of the being. Who is the mother in you? Who is that vital child in you? Who is like the father figure in you? Do they come together every night? Do they talk to each other? Are your parts aware of what is one doing, or they are making secret plans? So to bring a sense of cohesion in their own being, and that is what we call as alignment. When we talk about alignment of our own being, it is my mind and vital talking to each other? Are they not trying to prove that sense of identity? Oh, I am superior, oh, you are inferior? Because we have that deep-rooted sense of rejection in the moralistic sense, no? So that ability to let go of this moral understanding and strictly seeing it as a process. and acknowledging it, accepting it. A lot of like in that direction, I do a lot of self-work.
I think that's very wonderful, very powerful. The way you just shared, the way you just described this particular example of family system and to understand parts of the being. Just last night I was reading something from the mother for some other work, and she was talking. This is a conversation, and she was talking about how at different times, whenever she used to give that psychological perfection flower to different people, she would have a different understanding of the different kind of psychological perfection that the person would need to grow and to transform. But she said that every time sincerity is number one. So the 5 petals, the 5 different psychological perfections, but sincerity every time stays on number one. And then she goes on to describe that another word that comes to me for sincerity is transparency. So how transparent we are in our own understanding. And from there comes that sense of responsibility. And the other thought that came to me as I was listening to you was, what you said, I felt is so profound in its application as to how we look at society and culture. There is so much of, again, that blame game going on. India is where it is, Indian culture or Indian society is in fix because the others did this, or because of that, or because of that, or that in the past, this in the past. But what about taking the responsibility for now? What are we doing now as individuals, as Indians, in terms of changing things around, or in terms of changing our own approach to understanding who we are? And that is, again, because again, so many things are connecting for me as I'm listening to you. So I don't want to go into that, but there was an essay of Nalini Da, that I was reading about immortal nations. And he said that those nations have a much more like a longer durability, if you will, or like the inner, who have developed a very strong inner life. Those are the cultures that sustain. And of course, India lies sort of like, at the top of the list. But if we don't continue that, as Sri Aurobindo also wants, truth will go elsewhere. So in that sense, I think in the terms of this cultural rebirth, or sort of like the regeneration or the renaissance of Indian culture and Indian society, Indian spirit, in that context, I see the work that you're doing is very relevant. It's maybe one student, one person at a time, one individual at a time, starting with you yourself as a teacher, as an academic, as an individual, and then sort of bringing that awareness to others that you interact with in whatever educational context. So I think I really want to thank you for the work that you're doing and the insights that you bring to, for others who are sort of walking along with you on this journey. Before we close, I just want to again kind of ask you one last question. That have you thought about taking this first person exploration tool, if I can call it as a tool or an approach, to teacher education programs or to teacher education workshops? Have you maybe had a chance to discuss with the education department, education programs at Auro, and making that part of their teacher education programs, or is this something that you would like to take up in the future? Because I personally, coming from a background of education, I personally feel that it's necessary. And I've looked at all that has been said in new education policy on revitalizing teacher education. This is totally missing. So if a teacher is not inclined to walk the path of knowing oneself and taking responsibility for one's actions, one's intention and alignment, how is she going to bring it to the students? So if you haven't, then I would encourage you to do that, please.
No, I do understand the need of it, but I also think that teaching, till the time teaching is taken as a profession, it's very difficult to bring in first person exploration, because essentially it's a game of identity there, that people who take teaching as a profession, as an identity, that, oh, I'm a teacher, or this is my work. And then we have that understanding of, oh, this is work, this is me. So till the time that division is there, it's very difficult to bring in, because as the teacher steps into the class, they immediately have this idea that, okay, I'm telling you something. And now you will only use the word transparency. That's one of the word I really live by. That how can I be as silent as possible and the knowledge can work through me? But this can only come through practice. So like I said, I have small groups who are like either counselors or teachers who are attempting their own journey. But what happens, like one of the observation I would like to share, that, for example, there's a group of 5 teachers talking about self-exploration, talking about first-person inquiry. But the moment they go to the class, they again step into their conditioning. And that is why in the beginning I said that it's a very slow process. And because again, if you are, say, in an organization, you're employed, so then there are a lot of other duties that comes with just as teaching. And so in a very short manner, if I want to put it, the sense of identity in the teaching profession needs attention. And once we start exploring that and expanding it, first person will become very natural to it, to the idea. And I'm very much personally interested in first person exploration, and I want, especially in the field of psychology, like research methodology, if more and more people will take it, it will become a school or a program of research. But the thing is that we always want to set things into the already predefined aspects. So though I will talk about first person exploration, but when I start writing, I will bring in the research knowledge I have. So this is what I see a lot. And that is why there's a lot of talking about it, but there are only a handful of people who are actually applying it. Because the real sadhana comes in application. Mind receives, but it needs alignment of all the parts of the being to execute it. So yoga is execution. And that is in itself a journey for all of us. So, I mean, of course, if you ask me, you and I, all of us aspire that this should become the norm, but we are doing our own part in just letting it flow and having that faith and keeping that aspiration that knowledge and will is coming together. So that's how I see
it. Yeah, I think you've again kind of pointed to something very like the crux of the issue here. As long as the teaching work is seen as a professional work that is separate from one's life and one's life's inner work, again, we have to look back at the wisdom that Mother has given us in such like one sentence, like, these are sutras, the mantras that she's given, that this whole idea of this is ordinary life in which the teaching profession will come. And this is the spiritual life in which knowing myself will come. As long as we continue to separate out the two, we will continue to have these challenges. So maybe at this point, with this aspiration that more and more people come to see the truth of that there are no two lives. There is no one ordinary life and no one spiritual life, but one life, and all work can be taken up in this approach to first person. So I wish to really thank you, Aditi, for this wonderful conversation and bringing lots of insights to how we can go about rethinking and then reworking some from our individual, on our individual level in the field of education, and bringing this more idea of psychology of understanding oneself, and that as a starting point for everything else that we do in the educational space. So thank you so much, Aditi. And I wish you all the best for your work, both at Auro and with People First and other group work that you do. Thank you.
it. All right. Thank you so much.
Namaste.